We stayed in a hotel one night, and he started to speak again. It was just a phenomenal experience. So I'd say, what does that say? He'd say, fire extinguisher. What does that say? Exit. And so we were running around this hotel frantic looking for new words, and he was just one after the other.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. Today's show is brought to us by Athletic Brewing, the makers of non-alcoholic craft beer to help you stay fit, stay trained. It's considered the best beer for endurance athletes. Check them out, athleticbrewing.com, as well as CS Instant Coffee. If you're going in the backcountry this year and you want great coffee to take with you on some camping trip next to a lake early in the morning, I highly recommend CS Instant Coffee. 100% Arabica coffee and has compostable packaging, so you don't have to contribute to the world's waste. Discount for both of those in the show notes. I really enjoyed this conversation with Travis about he and his wife taking their autistic son on a cross-country, cross-America bike trip, a really long trip, and you'll hear that their son's pretty severely autistic, and it took some serious innovation and bravery and courage on their end to say, hey, we're going to ride a bicycle across America. They're Australian, so it's a totally different continent, halfway around the world. And, I know a lot of us out there might be facing a challenge that we think is going to keep us from doing the adventure sport we love or pursuing some sort of adventure in general. So this hits very close to home for me, and I think it will be beneficial for a lot of you as well, hearing from Travis and his just resilient, positive attitude about the whole thing. Amazing. Also, I want to say on episode 441, literally 100 episodes ago, we had a guy named Austin Howell. He was a free soloist climber. He unfortunately passed away last week. He fell while climbing in North Carolina, and so I just wanted to pay our respects. And I hope that you rest in peace, Austin. But Austin was a great person. He started a podcast himself about free soloing, and he and I talked a lot about that process, gave him some pointers. So this is obviously, you never see something like this coming. But for those of you, if you're into a sport that is considered relatively dangerous, even if you're not, anything can happen. It's just very sad, very unfortunate. And again, buddy, I hope you rest in peace. We have a great episode coming at you today. We have a serial adventurer who's been all over the world: Pakistan, India, Malaysia, Singapore, Canada, and so many other places, as well as an educator. He's been teaching for over 20 years and has an awesome family that he does adventures with. We're going to get into his story and one of the trips he's done in the last few years that was just amazing, in my opinion. And that's Travis Saunders. Is it Saunders or Sanders?
Yeah, it's Saunders. Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, cheers, mate. Cheers. And what an introduction.
Well, yeah, I
hope I've done all that.
Hope I didn't get anything wrong. But I'm going to guess from the accent you're coming at us from somewhere in Australia today.
Yeah, that's correct. From Adelaide in Australia. And it's the middle of winter here.
Oh, man. So what's a winter like in Adelaide?
That's the funny story. It's absolutely beautiful. I guess Adelaide's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those amazing places. It's quite dry, and about 8 months of the year, almost 9 months of the year, we have blue skies.
That's pretty enviable. Dang, we're in Colorado. It's pretty nice here. I'm not gonna lie. Winters can be cold, but not terrible. Not terrible. But Yeah, man. So you've done some incredible adventures, but you've been a teacher for a long time, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Like over 20 years ago, I studied a Bachelor of Education, majoring in environmental science. But that love of environmental science grew from those very early experiences of my dad dropping a good friend of mine and myself about 100 kilometres out of the city of Melbourne where we grew up. And we'd take the fishing rods in a backpack and we'd head out for either a day or a couple of days, and we'd walk up and down these little creeks trout fishing, and we'd camp the night. And I was, fortunate enough to see some magnificent Australian wildlife in those journeys: koalas, kangaroos, and the elusive platypus, which is an animal that lives, in some of these remote streams in Australia. And I had this passionate geography teacher at the time. And that love and, that exploration and that passionate geography teacher built me up to what I am today, to have a really good understanding of what it means to look after the environment, but also connect with the environment and connect with the people that really appreciate the great outdoors. And so I am certainly somebody that has a bucket list of adventures and not enough time and not enough of my life to be able to achieve them all.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
I'm sure a lot of the people you talk to are exactly the same. How do you fund these adventures?
Yeah, how do you fund them? How do you have the time? I mean, it's the more you read, the more you research, all it does is make you more frustrated on and it's the different ways you can experience it. You can hike it, you can bike it, you can fly over it if you have the capability. I mean, there's just so many ways to experience the same places. It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Look, it is, and of course these days we're inundated with Instagram and Facebook kind of photos and stories of all these amazing people doing these incredible adventures, and you just say, I want to do that. I want to be there. I want to explore what they are, and then sometimes you just got to kind of kick back and go, all right, here's a reality check. They're going through some pretty tough times out on those trails or that adventure. I'm enjoying my life at the moment. I'm going to kind of explore what it means to live the moment, and then I'm going to research my own adventure and make it my own unique experience to then go out there and give it a crack and not live it as much through social media.
Yeah, that social media can really ruin your day, your life, really, if you let it just the envy get a hold of you. But man, it sounds like those early experiences with your dad is kind of what built this foundation of adventure. And when you think about it, then those aren't the grandest experiences in the sense of like climbing a big mountain. It's just being out there with your dad, doing fishing, and just being there. That was important.
Yeah, and I think it's those kind of like those formative years that builds up to who I am now in those summative years. And so it was such an important time in my life to build up those little skills and those splinter skills about how to be able to cope in certain situations and to get myself out of situations. And so obviously I thank my dad for that, but I also thank other people that I met early on, like that geography teacher, like that really good mate of mine that I walked up and down those creeks with. And I'm a firm believer that we're all lifelong learners and we can learn something of everyone we meet and every interaction that we have and build upon those skills to have a crack at some of those big adventures that are kind of scary for so many people, but don't need to be.
So what was the process like for you starting out with those smaller foundational experiences into what you do now? These big, not even expeditions, I guess, but just multiple month-long adventures.
Yeah, look, I think it was a case of a little bit of luck or bad luck at this stage. We were going through a bit of a revolution in an Australian education system, and we had a where I was growing up, they made 10,000 teachers kind of redundant, and they were folding all these schools and creating from these small schools, they were creating these super schools, and it meant that as I was coming out of university, there were no jobs, and so I opened up the newspaper one day. Yeah, we had newspapers back then, and there was
Yeah.
and there was a job going in a Maori Polynesian school in New Zealand, and it was that moment in my life that really opened up adventure like I'd never experienced before. And before you knew it, over the course of several months of being over there, I'd trekked all of the great walks of New Zealand kind of back to back. And that opened up a life of adventure, but and also an importance of actually doing these adventures with other people. And that was so important to me that I had the experiences that I could share with other people. And I've done so many adventures around the world solo, and they're exciting. That's great. But the ones I like to talk about these days are the ones that I've shared with people, and that includes things like walking across England, and where I loved it so much that I did it again the next year with a different friend, and cycling through the volcanic regions of Indonesia with another good mate. And there's so many different kind of those smaller, 2-week, 1 month long adventures that kind of gave me those skills that I needed and the confidence and the experience to go, hey, you know what? I can tackle anything. And if we break it down, if you can do a 2-day adventure, you can do a 2-month adventure, you could do a year-long adventure. You just have to be able to plan ahead and plan for those things that may go, possibly or terribly wrong. And so adventure's my life. It's what I do between working and looking after my severely autistic son.
Well, first of all, what a place to build a love for adventure, New Zealand. Jeez, that sets you up for some epic stuff going on there. And so after experiencing that and you come back home, did you eventually find a job teaching and start doing that?
Yeah, and I guess that's what I've done for years, is that I've gone in and I've gone, all right, I really, want to go to this particular part of the world. What's the best job to do that in? That's a teacher's position. We have a 6-week break over our summer holidays, and so I was able to do some of those adventures over that 6-week break. But I also worked for almost 10 years in the Northern Territory, crocodile country, and we had a 4-week break in the middle of the year. So that enabled me to kind of bunny hop straight across to Southeast Asia for lots of mini adventures, cycling and trekking. And so these days are very different. I am no longer a teacher. I'm an educational consultant, which gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of looking after my son and exploring with my son on lots of little mini adventures, but also some big adventures. And so work life's very much changed. And that was changed when he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum around about 20 months of age.
And how old is your son now?
He's almost 10.
Wow.
Yeah, he is just the most super dude. He's autistic. He is an incredible singer. He's beautiful. He's talented. He's intelligent. He's such an adorable boy that kind of changes the people's worlds when they meet him. And Fiona and myself, Fiona's Patch's mum, we call him. We call Patrick Patch. We're just so lucky to be his mum and dad, and we just tell him this every day. And Patch is, he has some very, very complex behaviours. He has difficulty with communication. There are severe deficits in terms of communication. We have to explore the different ways that we communicate with him. He has many varied and complex social skill difficulties. He's never played with a toy like I did growing up, and he has many varied, repetitive and restricted behavioural patterns. And so as a dad that was somebody who loved the great outdoors and loved adventure, I was always immersing him in these different experiences. And we learnt early on that his life was going to be very different to his peers growing up. And hopefully I can explore some of those things today as to what led us to go on an amazing adventure with him.
I mean, it sounds like it's incredible. Right now, you obviously seem like a great dad, but I was curious to know, when you first got the news or first started realizing, your son is autistic, what were some of the emotions going through you and your partner, and just kind of, what were you thinking? Was it nerve-wracking, or did you just kind of say, this is going to be a new challenge, this is going to be fun? I don't know. What was happening?
It was an experience that I don't want to relive it, but I have to relive it. I have to talk to people about how it felt. If I take a step back, it was like, if it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago, there was a certain way that society talked about people with disabilities, and there was a certain narrative, and it was almost a woe is me, I feel sorry for you, mum and dad, and it was very ableist in its discussion about the way that we talked about people on the autism spectrum, people with disabilities.
Right. These
days, thankfully, in Australia, that has changed, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years. The way that we talk about disability, the representation of people with disability in the workforce, in the media is growing. We're starting a revolution here in terms of the way that we have inclusion within our schools, and so this is kind of an exciting time to be in. But if I take a step back and I go back kind of like 7.5, 8 years ago when Patch was diagnosed on the autism spectrum, we were still living in this bubble, this social bubble of this knowledge base that our parents had kind of embedded in our minds, and that the experiences that I had with other children at schools that had disabilities. And so it was a negative one. And so the initial, those thought processes that go through your mind as a parent is, oh, this is horrible. This is devastating. What does this mean for my son's future? What does this mean for our family? How is this going to affect us financially, et cetera, et cetera? And whilst there's many of those things that we still go through and we still experience, I want to live in a society that when somebody gets diagnosed with a disability, everyone goes, okay, cool. All right, this is where we're at. Okay. I've heard some really amazing things about the things that people with disabilities are achieving. We're going to focus on what's possible and what motivates our child, and we're going to create these positive associations in our child's life. And we are going to be the most positive parents in the world. But of course, Patch gets diagnosed. I've got all of this knowledge which has been embedded in me from generations before of this sometimes could be perceived as a negative thing. And so I felt really shit. Fiona did too. We sat in the car and we bawled our eyes out. We went home. We were staying at my in-laws at that stage, because we'd moved from the Northern Territory down to South Australia. And we kind of cuddled in bed in a fetal position and we bawled our eyes out, literally for days. Jeez. And it was the most horrible, horrible experience. We knew our son was different. We knew his life would be different. We didn't know what it would be like, but we also knew that we were very, very much lost individuals. We felt so alone. And I remember getting up out of this fetal position and saying to Fiona, I have to get out of the house. I have to go for a jog. And, I wouldn't say that I was fit. I wouldn't say that I was unfit. Terribly unfit, but I put on a few pounds. We'd moved states, so there was this whole transition period in terms of not exercising. And so I went to go for a jog. I put the runners on, the shorts on, the T-shirt, kicked out of the house, and literally got a few hundred metres down the road, sat in the gutter, bawled my eyes out again, and threw up. Yeah, it was that moment in my life that I realised that, hey, shit's got to change here. I've got to be that pivotal, that centre, hardcore point that really looks after myself, because if I'm not looking after myself, I'm not looking after my family and ultimately my son and creating opportunities for my son. And so it was a moment that changed my life, and then I started to run. 5Ks turned into 10Ks, turned into 20Ks, turned into me doing these kind of midnight runs overnight, and turned into running ultra marathons, to eventually running 12 marathons in 12 months to raise over $150,000 for autism organisations in Australia. And if I felt that I needed to be proactive in terms of, this reactive thing that I was experiencing through social media, in terms of I wanted to talk about the positive aspects of my son's life. I wanted to talk about the positive aspects of those other parents that I met, and the organisations that were, kicking butt on doing amazing things in terms of the way that they spoke about autism and the way that they used language which was reflective of what the community of autistic people were actually wanting. And so, yes, so that's it. And, I kicked out and I ran a few, big ultra marathons and a few, there was a 100-miler in there for a 24-hour event. And we got a lot of community support and a lot of people on board. And for short moments in time, we're able to change people's lives by talking about these positives and not giving people hope, but almost giving people almost like a roadmap of, hey, this is a better direction to go down, rather than constantly talking about the negative aspects of what bringing up a child that has autism can often bring with it. Not saying that we don't talk about those aspects, but think about the way that we do communicate that, so that it actually looks after that particular individual that has the diagnosis itself.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that, whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories, with IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout. Yeah, it sounds like you've put a lot of thought into the way you guys want to approach this, and how you have approached it, and you've kind of alluded to it. But what are some of the common misconceptions of autism when it comes to caring for someone with autism that you've found? I know keeping a positive attitude has probably been crucial for all this, and it hasn't been easy, I'm sure. But, there, a lot of people probably do feel that, their adventure days are over if they have an issue like this pop up.
Oh, look, I guess I can't talk for any other individual that is on the autism spectrum, or any other families' circumstances involving their own child and what they can go and experience. But I've met a lot of parents now that you get connected with like people, don't you, in life often. And so I've been connected with other autism parents that have children that are on the autism spectrum, that had gone out and done some kind of awesome adventures, including motorbike trips in Africa, and going across to South America to do small treks and things like that. But the one thing that we all have in common, and this is about always presume competence. We have a child that is minimally verbal to non-verbal in terms of the way that he's able to express himself. Now, I've been lucky enough to have made a podcast about autism, and I've spoken to non-verbal autistics all around the world that now type to communicate. And they all say the same thing. always presume competence. Never give up on us. Always make sure that you can help us to learn the method of communication that works for us. Being nonverbal doesn't mean you have nothing to say. Being nonverbal doesn't mean you don't understand those conversations that are going on around you. And so the biggest thing that I could say to anyone out there is that if somebody's not looking at you, it doesn't mean that they don't understand every single word you're saying. You don't have to make eye contact to understand what somebody else is saying. And we know that when we go for a bushwalk, don't we? We've got our good mate who's in front of us, and we're often walking behind our good mate. We're not making eye contact to be able to have a conversation. We're not making eye contact to be able to understand what that particular person is saying. And so that's no different to somebody on the autism spectrum. And that's something I'd say to teachers too. And how many times have I said it myself and made a mistake in the classroom? And it doesn't have to be necessarily to somebody on the autism spectrum. It's to say, can you look at me when I'm talking to you? For some people, it's difficult to make that eye contact. For some people, it is so painful to make that eye contact. So why, as a society or as a therapy organisation, are we trying to make people do something that is incredibly painful to them or doesn't meet their needs? And so that's the biggest misconception I can say, is that if we presume that somebody's competent and we provide them with those resources to be able to communicate, they can then tell us what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and then provide them with that choice and control over their life. And if we forget about every meme that's ever been created about autism, and we forget about everything that we've ever been told, and we actually can communicate with that individual or communicate with that individual's parents that often know that their child best, we can actually break down all those misconceptions and cliches and misunderstandings and actually focus on that individual as opposed to focusing on a diagnosis. And we're going to kick a lot more goals if we, tackle it that way.
It sounds like that it's taught you that not everything is what it seems. And I'm sure it's changed you tremendously, this experience over the last 10 years.
Oh, yeah. Look, like when we go on these adventures, we continue to learn. And if we just think about it on that basis, that if we're open for that knowledge, we can then open up new corridors or new doors or new roads to new learning experience and ultimately growth as individuals. And so, yeah, I have learnt so much, and I've also realised how wrong I've been. And I don't see that as a negative. I see that as a real positive. That's enabled me to go, okay, I got it really, really wrong in those early stages. I was concentrating on things ultimately that my son couldn't do. And whilst it's important to concentrate on those aspects, if we can concentrate, more on those possibilities and what motivates your child and what their strengths and interests are, we can kind of, cradle or encourage that growth. And that's why we came up with this, bizarre, all out there idea to cycle from one side of America to the other side with our autistic son.
Yeah, I mean, you said adventure is your life, and you aren't kidding. Just because, you have these new challenges and opportunities, you guys did something that so many people would be terrified of to do. Where did this idea come from, and what gave you the confidence to say, we're doing this?
Oh, yeah, look, it's I guess these ideas just don't pop up, but this kind of did pop up. But there was a lot of circumstances that led to it. School wasn't going great for Patch. He was really, really struggling. He was visually distressed, and he lost a lot of language, and as a result of that, Fiona and myself, we were struggling. Our relationship was struggling. Our entire family unit was struggling, and it was around the same time that there was a Victorian organisation over here that set up something called the ICANN network. And it was set up by an autistic lawyer that kind of said that I want to create environments that are based on strengths and interests for kids. I want to work with schools. I want to concentrate on those positive. I want full inclusion to be able to support kids, and I want to mentor children. And I liked it. I really liked this idea of, focusing on what those strengths and interests are, to embrace the autistic individual. And so this particular day we were on a lake, and I was sitting on the side of the lake, and Patch was out in these little kind of, I think they were like 12-foot skiff sailing boats, and Fiona was out there guiding Patch on how to control this little skiff. And there was this another I think he's about 24, 25 years old. Trent was his name. He came in and he said, Travis, Dad says there's nothing I can't do. And I was sitting next to Dad, and I said, yeah, absolutely, Trent. There's nothing you can't do. And his Dad says that, one day I'll be able to, go out by myself, because Trent also had a carer next to him guiding him through this sailing process. And Dad says, you know what, Trent, you're almost there, mate. You're almost there. You're going to get there. And Trent went in and out half a dozen times. And every time he came back in, he kind of had this same conversation with me. And it really stuck. There's nothing you can't do. And so I had this whole concept of there's nothing you can't do in terms of what Trent had said. And then there was the I Can Network in Victoria, which started this kind of almost this little revolution in terms of looking at autism differently in terms of strengths and interest based. And I thought, nothing I can't do, strengths and interest based. What is it that Patch is good at? So we went home that day and we kind of spoke about it in detail. Patch loves the outdoors. He loves camping. He loves movement. And he also loves and is passionate about leaves. It can't be a day go by that you don't see Patch hasn't picked up a leaf, and he stims on it. He's got this self-stimulatory behaviour where he kind of rubs it, flicks it, and listens to it, smells it, tastes the leaf. And these days I look at it as a real positive. It's the way that he is interacting with the world. And so Fiona and I also had to break it down a little bit more. We had to look at our own life and what are the things that we're good at? What do we enjoy doing? And so we looked at one of the most amazing times of our life, and that was a time when we cycled from Singapore through Malaysia, through Thailand, through Laos, then flew to Canada, and then cycled from Canada all the way down to Mexico, fully self-supported, carrying panniers, and it was the time of our life. So we thought, what if we can get a bicycle and we can just go on some day trips with Patch? So, of course, I tracked down this bicycle. It took quite a long time. It's a semi-recumbent tandem, and Patch sits in the front of it. I sit at the back and I cycle from behind, and I steer this bicycle. And so the whole idea was to get out in nature. He loved movement. He loved the breeze across his face. I could then teach him. I could teach him how to read using road signs. I could teach him about the bicycle componentry. I could have a running narrative going along describing things as they're occurring, so we could create these positive associations. And, of course, it worked. He was loving it. He was loving coming home from school to get on this bike. He just wanted to jump on this bike straight away. And we were smashing it, man. It was awesome. And so I said to Fiona, what if we could go back to America and we could do a rail trail? One of these kind of like 200, 300-mile rail trails in the States. She goes, yeah, let's do it. Let's do this. And so, of course, I buy this big, United States map. I put it on the wall in the little house we were staying in. Fiona goes to work. I was a stay-at-home dad doing the odd job here and there. And, of course, my mind took over. And, I started mapping out these rail trails. And I go, you know what, this is great, but it costs a lot of money for an Aussie to get over to America with a few bikes. And, what if we just kind of break it down day by day and see if we can't go from one side of America to the other? And so Fiona was at work. I mapped this out. I got the highlighter out. And before you know it, I've got this route from one side of America to the other. And so she comes home from work and I said, Fee, what do you reckon of this? And she kind of laughed at me. She knows what I'm like. She said, yeah, let's do it.
Holy cow. That's awesome.
As out there as it sounds. And so that's what we did. We rode from one side of America to the other over 79 days.
And what was
camping
it, 5,500 kilometers?
Yeah, 5,600 kilometers in total.
Kilometers. So what was your route? What did that look like?
Yeah, so I guess, we'd ridden from, from Canada to Mexico back in 2007, and we loved the coast. And we thought about doing that trip again, but then we thought, life's about experiencing different things and having new associations. So for us, it really, the route or the route of which we say in Australia wasn't the biggest kind of decision. For us, it was about, okay, we've got 3-month visa. What's possible in 3 months? What can we do day in, day out? And so the bike itself was actually the most important thing in terms of that routine for our son. Now, a lot of people talk about children on the autism spectrum not being able to cope with change. For our son, it was the opposite. He loves change. He wants change. He wants to continual immersion in new things to be able to learn. Imagine if you're nonverbal and you're sitting down at a table and somebody teaches you that's a square, that's a circle, that's the number 1, that's the number 5, and they do that continually and they treat you under your age group. Well, that was the experience that our son had for many, many years in terms of his education. People weren't presuming that he was competent. So we had to run off that basis that he was competent. And so over 79 days, we traveled between 40 to 60 miles a day. And we started out at, and I believe it's Anacortes in Washington State. Is that the right pronunciation?
I actually don't know.
There you go.
Let me look it up.
Yeah. So we kicked over the Northern Cascades, then the Rocky Mountains, then through the plains, through North Dakota, and then we kind of met up with lots of rail trails as we got further east across the states, and then around the Great Lakes, kicked into Canada, and then kicked on to the CNO trail, and then all the way through to Washington DC, and we finished at the Australian Embassy with a kind of a huge Aussie crowd to greet us there at the finish. But
wow,
of course,
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah. No, it was awesome. It was a very kind of a home crowd parochial type of experience, and we had a few friends that were actually working in Washington DC that came out and saw us, and that was really nice. But the cool things that occurred were often when things went wrong. It's day 3 for us, and we're in Australia, and it's a pretty flat country, and so to train to do a journey as epic as this with our son, we had to kind of go to these little kind of mountainous regions of Australia to get a few, leg repetitions for that workout for day 3 when we crossed Washington Pass. And of course, Washington Pass is, no small hill. It's, 5,477 feet or whatever it is on day 3, but it killed us. I've got this massive bike with my son's weight on the front of it. We've got 4 panniers hanging off it and the tent as well. It's a lot of weight, it's a few hundred pounds of weight. And I had to get off the bike and I had to push the bike. And so Fiona and I pushed our bikes over 6 mountain passes in the Rocky Mountains, Northern Cascades.
How did your son do with that?
He did well. He was amazing. He got off the bike lots. We held hands. We taught him how to push the bike. We sat on the side of the road and we watched these little streams, and we spoke about the streams, and he experienced cold. We could talk about what it meant to be cold. And we're able to teach him in situ in that particular moment in time. And we spoke about road signs and we found number plates. We collected number plates the whole way across America, and we got him talking about the numbers. And eventually, when we got to about halfway across America, we stayed in a hotel one night, and he started to speak again. And it was just a phenomenal experience. So I'd say, what does that say? And he'd say, fire extinguisher. And what does that say? Exit. And so we were running around this hotel, frantic, looking for new words, and he was just one after the other. And these days he doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't express himself verbally, but it's those moments in time that kind of, reinforce that presumption of competence to go, hey, he understands absolutely everything we are saying to him. So those conversations that we have in front of him are always positive, always, inclusive of him and his needs and to make sure that he's understanding what's going on. But it was the people of America that was probably the highlight. I mean, environmentally, it was incredible. It was the most incredible experience of my life. One of the most amazing things that we've ever done, particularly as a family. But it was the people. It was the North Dakota Autism Center that took us in for 4 days off the side of the road, and the founders of that organization put us up in their house and fed us and looked after us, and we shared stories and we had this connection. It was a guy by the name of Gene Meek in Shelby, Montana, that came across us on the side of the road and offered us a place to stay for the night. Threw us his car keys and he said, go and tour around my little town, go as far as you want. Helped fix, and he paid for a brake set that blew out when we were coming down off the Rocky Mountains. He then flew from one side of America to the other to be there at the end when we finished the journey, because he knew the significance and what it meant to travel with a child, but to travel with a child that had complex needs. It was something that he just didn't want to miss out on, and he wanted to show us that support. And we found out that he had a nephew that was severely autistic, and he just thought it was a brilliant thing that we were doing, concentrating on our son's strengths and giving him those amazing positive associations in his life.
This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use Adventure at checkout for 20% off. I did want to say, when you first started talking about the plan for this adventure, it's beautiful the way you said it. It was, you basically aligned the things your son enjoyed and wanted to do and was capable of doing, and the things you were capable of doing and the things you enjoyed. And where those things all align, that Venn diagram, you created this idea for this adventure. And I don't know, I just feel that's just such a wonderfully opportunistic way to look at things, because without that outlook, I don't think you would have this would never have crossed your mind as even a possibility, much less to make it actually happen. I mean, what an adventure. I mean, beautiful, beautiful places you were experiencing, but also in this beautiful way. Man, that is awesome. That is awesome.
Yeah. Look, it's a classic, isn't it? I remember a day, like there's some negative things that occurred, but we kind of take the positive out of it. It was a negative in terms of it was scary, it was risk taking. What the heck were we doing as mum and dad? Right. We camped in Theodore Roosevelt National Park with herds of bison that stampeded past the tents.
Oh,
we had to get past these bison that were on the middle of the road and kind of navigate our way around these beasts that were the size of pickup trucks. It was
they're
funny.
Incredibly looking. They're Very intimidating.
Oh, really are, you really are. But I just love the way that you put it, and I've just created a new term, and I want everyone to use this now. But I've just written this family Venn diagram. What a great way of looking at life, seeing how we can meet the needs of everyone in that family unit. So that's it. That's a new term,
All
family
right.
Venn diagram.
Yeah, I won't charge you for it. You can have it. I'm just no, but it really is because you know, gosh, it's so easy to look at all those things that don't overlap. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. But the thing you can do is still it meets obviously meets the need of adventure. It also meets all the needs of your son, and it just seems, I don't know. This is just mind blowing to me that you guys took this on and did this. Could you tell me, because you've done experiences on your own and cycling, and you say you and your wife did just an incredible bike touring trip. What were some of the unique challenges day to day with your son that was maybe different for someone who's just, you know, touring around the country by themselves or with a spouse or something?
Oh, probably the sensory needs. But it enabled me to learn so much more about my son's sensory needs. The things that we kind of take for granted from day to day, and we don't actually think about because we're not experiencing what they're experiencing in a particular moment of time when we're at home or when the kids are out in the yard. But when you're on a bicycle, I had to think about how my son was feeling every moment. So I knew when he was cold because I was cold. And so I knew when he was hot because, you know, I was hot. You know, when those over 100 degrees Fahrenheit days, you know, it was hot. So he was going through those sensory needs. I knew when he was experiencing hay fever when we got across that kind of middle part or northern middle part of America because of the fields that we were cycling, you know, past or through. And so I was able to understand him more in a 3-month period than I had his entire life. And so it was challenging, those sensory needs. It was challenging to get on top of that on that moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis, but it was also an opportunity to learn about his needs and how we could best cater for those needs and explore that and discuss that and talk to him in a way that he knew that Dad knew that he was feeling pretty crappy. It's sounds pretty corny when I talk about it, but like it's this beautiful symbiotic relationship that was formed between my son and myself, being at one together on that bicycle.
Yeah, I would love to post a picture of the bike and you guys on it because it is kind of you're right there in his ear almost like hey, look at that. Hey, I know it was probably hard to get used to the weight distribution, but it seemed like you were able to just interact with him much more easily, in his view not being obstructed at all by anything in front of him. What an incredible front seat experience for this whole journey.
Oh, look, it was funny, because this bicycle, obviously, when I first started out training on it, it was difficult. By day 3, I was smashing it. By the end of the trip across the States, I mean, we did 1,000 kilometres on these kind of rough old gravel trails too across the States.
Wow.
We were able to bunny hop rocks and curbs. It was like it was a mountain bike.
That's incredible. I didn't know that you guys are off road so. I mean, you keep throwing details about the trip that just keep heightening the amount of how impressed I am by this. That's amazing.
Yeah. Look, and we also purchased a tag along bike that connected onto the back of the Husapino, and so it was almost like a road train. And so Patch was on the tag along for about 1,000 kilometres, and he'd kind of spin and pedal along and laugh and carry on. He'd take his hands off the handlebars and shake them in the air. It was kind of a bit scary, but he was just having a ball. It was brilliant. So
Wow. So how was did you guys camp a lot, and how was that with your son? Did he you said he enjoys that?
Yeah, look, he absolutely loves camping. It's almost as if it's a bit of a safe place. He also likes the texture of the tent, and he likes kind of like the different colours that come through on the different angles. I think as the sun shines through the tent as well, and so it was an opportunity to help him to learn how to put the tent up, and so there was a lot of kind of guiding along those lines, and the majority of the time we camped as we went across the United States, and it's strange now is that I don't remember a lot of those kind of positive experiences. I remember a couple of negative experiences with camping where he was upset, and we're in these state parks, but these kind of jam-packed state parks with lots and lots
Yeah.
of people in them,
Hmm.
and Patch is upset, and Fiona and I, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock, and we're just kind of counting down the minutes to get on that bike because
Wow.
we know that the whole state park is awake, and we also want to get Patch out of that kind of situation, and so but you can't do that in the middle of the night. It's just it wasn't possible, and so it's those experiences that while they're not they're great for storytelling, but they're probably not great positive associations for Patch and our family. But there was times that were incredibly hard, and hey, isn't that day-to-day life too?
It sure
If
can be. Yeah.
Yeah. We were having tough times at home, and so we expected that there'd be tough times on the road.
Were you guys surprised at all that you were able to complete this, or was that just you had made up your mind by the time you started?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We just kind of set out saying we're going to tackle this 1 kilometre, 1 mile at a time.
Hmm.
And once we'd got over Washington Pass, we were like, yeah, okay, that's our first significant peak. And then, of course, you get over that first one, then you've got another one. I think Loop Pass it was, and then there was another one after that, and then another one after that, and it's like get to about the fourth one. Fiona's going, "What are we doing? What were we thinking about? This is ridiculous.
Right.
I'm not fit enough." Because, of course, when I was training with Patch, she was she was at work, so she didn't have the opportunity to
Oh
put the
my.
miles in things. And so, but once we got over the Rocky Mountains, we were like, righto, we can do this. And but then we got kind of 3/4 of the way across the states, and we were tired. But it was the experiences and the people and that we met every day that really, really kind of motivated us to keep going. And the fact that Patch was having such a great time, and it just meant that, hey, we've got to knock this on the head now. We've got to finish this last kind of 100, 200 kilometres, and that's what happened. We finished, and it was a glorious experience.
Wow. I can't imagine the feeling of accomplishment, of how proud you guys must have been of your son and of yourselves. And you've mentioned you said people a few times. Maybe that's something you didn't expect. I don't know if that was something in your mind. I know for a lot of people we talk to, that is a surprising aspect of their adventure, that they look back on it with such fondness and such gratitude, is the incredible compassion that people show them during their trip.
Oh, look, it's mind blowing the way that people kind of came out of these little nooks and crannies to support us. I've made some lifelong friendships out of adventure travel, but I think that guy Gene Meek that I spoke about, and I've spoken to the media all about the world about this fella from Shelby, Montana. He's probably the most amazing guy I've ever met. That just took a moment of his time to come and say good day and have a chat, and then lent a hand. and then travel from one side of the states to the other to come and see us finish. Those friendships and those relationships is what I'm searching for not only for myself, because I love to learn, I love to explore other people's lives, but for my son, to help him to learn how to communicate and learn how to socialise. We've got to increase the quality and the number of interactions that he has with people. And it seems to me that, I haven't met too many people in the world that are passionate about the outdoors and that are adventurous, that are kind of, are nasty people. There's kind of good people out.
We've talked to a few of them on this show.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, there's people who love the outdoors. They're connecting with nature. They're generally connecting with people too, and so that's why we think it's a great idea to kind of hit the road and do these types of activities with Patch.
If anyone out there is struggling to find hope for humanity, or to realize there are still good people out there, put yourself in an adventure somewhere that where you come through communities. You will see the most incredible people, like you said, come out of the woodwork, come out of the nook and crannies, and it'll change your life. It'll change the way you view the world forever. And just the most normal people are capable of doing that when you put yourself out there. And that's beautiful. I'm glad you brought that up. Man, what an adventure. What an adventure. And then you get all the way to Washington, D.C., have this grand, finale, completion, finish line. And then what? You just went back home and got to just reminisce for a little bit and unwind?
Yeah, so, kind of. We had a Labrador, and I was down at the local dog park, and I see this guy over there that's got dreadlocks, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a chat to you. You look like an interesting fella. And we got talking about adventure and about travel, and then I talked to him about what we did in the States, and then he says that he's a filmmaker, and he came across and met Patch. We had a few coffees, and before you know it, he said, look, I want to make a documentary about your family and about how you travel on bikes. And so we did a bit of a Kickstarter. It didn't kick. We didn't get enough money, but then we had people in the community go, hey, look, we want to kind of throw some money at this anyway. And so we raised enough just to do the filming aspect of it. We're trying to raise some more money we're hoping to get some investment to be able to finish off the documentary. But we had a film crew follow us for a couple of weeks on what's called the Mawson Trail in South Australia. It's a 900-kilometre off-road mountain bike trail. It's full on. It's hilly. It's gravel. It's from the top of the Flinders Ranges in South Australia all the way to Adelaide, and it explores some of the most beautiful country. And so we did this, and it was the toughest thing I have ever done in my life because it was so hardcore. After day one, I was broken. And, of course, it makes for great filming, doesn't it? But probably doesn't make for great great focus on what's possible and what motivates your child. Patch found it tough. We found it tough. We did it. We've got a lot of filming left to do. And so we're hoping that we can incorporate some of our next adventures possibly into that documentary as well. But we've got some big things planned for 2020. And we're hoping to get Patch up the top of the highest peak in every state and territory in Australia. He loves bushwalking, and they're all relatively small in terms of the height levels, but they're all very much achievable in terms of the distance to get up to some of these peaks. Some of them are only a kind of a 2 or 3 day trek to get to. Others you can get up and down them in a day very easily. But it's the remoteness of these mountains which is probably the most difficult thing, and there's a lot of travel involved. And so 2020 for us, we are hoping to kick off an adventure to explore different parts of Australia, taking the bikes with us to do lots of rail trails, but to help Patch become the youngest child in history to, break a world record, so to speak, to become the youngest child to have bagged each of these highest peaks in each state and territory of Australia, which would be epic.
I think it's incredible. And so are you trying to achieve all that next year, like within the calendar year, or is it going to be spaced out over a few years?
Yeah, we're hoping to do that in 2020. And of course, some of these are in the middle of the desert. They're very remote. Some of them are on Indigenous lands, which we need to get permission to be able to do. And we want the permission from the elders to be able to, make sure that we show respect to be able to do that. Red Bull tried a few years ago, and they could bag all of them except for one. Because they didn't have that permission. So there's a lot of kind of factors and logistics involved. I reckon I can get that one over the line. Fiona and I have a great respect for Indigenous culture. We've worked in Indigenous areas of Australia. We also understand that the importance of diversity and inclusion, and we reckon a greeting or a meeting between the elders and Patch might be a way to go. They do run tourism activities up one of these peaks, so I think even if it comes down to it, we'll get a crew of Indigenous elders to be able to help us get Patch to the top. But where there's a will, there's a way, isn't there?
Apparently, yeah. I mean, you know more about that than I do. You've proven it. Holy cow! Yeah, this just seems like another way that you guys have been able to kind of overlap what works for your son and what works for you, and something you want to do. It sounds awesome. So I was actually one of my last questions was what's in your future, but it sounds like you have an incredible adventure already in the works.
Yeah, look, there's so many components of this particular adventure for next year that I want to come together. Originally, I had the plan that we wanted to somehow get hold of an electric vehicle and travel from the top of Alaska to the bottom of South America. Now, we've had a change in the Australian dollar, which makes it very difficult to be able to do an adventure like that. And, of course, we wanted to do all these side trips with trekking and mountain biking, but it looks as if we might stick a little bit closer to home next year. And if I can incorporate an electric vehicle into that trip, it would make it even so much more special. But time will tell. And see if we can actually achieve that goal as well. So it's so many things, so little time. So let's live the moment and make adventure part of it. So there you go.
Wow. I'm a little speechless. You don't catch me speechless most of the time, but this is, I tell you what, I'm sure you've heard from people who've told you you've encouraged them, that a diagnosis with a child or some sort of perceived limitation does not have to be perceived that way. And the fact that you guys have taken these adventures on, I know for you, probably with your mindset now, is hard for us to see on the outside, but it feels like those things are now out of reach for a lot of people, I'm sure. And so when they see someone like you, it's just got to give that sense of adventure and that sense of this is possible back to them. And so, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, look, I guess, we've had some tough times over the years, and we just try to live an amazing, happy life, and try to kind of, crack through some of those difficult times. I've got a saying: there's no change without change, and if things aren't working out, you've got to try something different. And so, I guess one of the things in those very early days of diagnosis, Fiona and I got a lot of things wrong. There are a lot of questions that we wanted answered that we couldn't necessarily find out information about. And so over the last 18 months, almost 20 months now, we worked on a podcast for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC here. And so we were commissioned to produce a podcast about autism and family life. And so we would love it if people in America were able to kind of, share that podcast, get people listening to it, because it's a very intimate approach to podcasting where we explore certain facets of our family's life. And with our son's permission, we have been able to interview him and record his voice and use aspects or audio of his voice over 9 years. So it's quite incredible, really. Our son's minimally verbal, non-verbal, and to capture some of that language that he's used. But we then go out and we interview people all over the world, autistics, parents and professionals, about their everyday life, and so they then are able to offer some of those ideas and those supports that parents are looking for in those very early stages. And so we created a podcast that we needed, many years ago when Patch was first diagnosed to help others. And so it's called the Parenting Spectrum, and you can obviously get it on iTunes or wherever you download your podcast. So that's the Parenting Spectrum, and over 50% of the people that we interview are autistic, and they absolutely smash all those misconceptions and they break it all down. And right throughout this podcast, we talk about achieving the seemingly impossible and focusing on what's possible and what motivates your child, and it's all about strengths and interests. And of course, if you love travel and adventure, if as a minimum you only listen to one episode, listen to episode 6, because it's about the joy of travel with your child who's on the autism spectrum. And we interview a number of families that go off and do cracking, amazing things.
I will absolutely link that in the show notes of this episode. Is there any other way that people can get a hold of you or follow your journeys or keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So I have got a Facebook page. It's called School of the Road. School of the Road. And a little green logo there. It's got a little bicycle in the middle of it, a couple of trees on the outside, so you won't be able to miss it. And that's where I talk about our adventures in our day-to-day life and life growing up, bringing up a child. And I try to be really, really positive and try to be I'm not necessarily a role model, but somebody that's that talks in a way that's it's a new narrative, a way that we should always have been talking about disability and focusing on those strengths and those interests and helping build a community.
My goodness, Travis, thank you so much for coming on here and telling your journey and encouraging folks who might be facing something that is challenging. And for those that aren't, if they think they have an excuse as to why they can't do an adventure, you're telling them right now, like, there's a way you can do the things that fulfill you. You just got to be creative and think outside the box a little bit.
And to create that meaningful participation is probably one of the most important things. Make it work for your child and make it work for your family. Hey, and as you said, create that family Venn diagram, and you never know what your child and yourself are going to get out of that. And so it's been awesome talking to you.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I want to check out the film when it comes out.
Yeah, sweet, mate. And that's brilliant, mate. I'll let you know.
All right. Well, Travis, have a great day. Have a good morning. And
you too.
Tell your family hello, and thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, good on you, mate. No
All
worries.
Right.
Take care.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right.
Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.